I knew my own son was a snake the second I heard him planning to sell my grave. Not metaphorically. My parents are buried on the back hill, under the oak tree that's been there longer than I've been alive. That hill is part of this farm, part of me. And yet, my 45-year-old son Danny sat on my porch one warm April evening, telling his wife how they'd cash in on Dad's land the second they got me into an assisted living facility. I wasn't supposed to hear it. They thought I was dozing in the old rocking chair out front, the same one Mary and I used to sit in on summer nights. But I'd gone inside to grab a blanket, and as I passed the wall near the porch, I froze. Every word came through clear as day. "Babe, the place is worth over $1 million right now," his wife said. "Developers will pay in cash. We could finally buy that house in Denver and get our business off the ground." Danny chuckled, low and smug. "Yeah, Dad's slipping anyway. He can't keep up. It's time." And just like that, the air left my lungs. I'd spent my life busting my back for this land. I'd taught that boy to walk right here in the pasture. We'd fixed fences together, hauled hay in the July heat, and watched storms roll in from the north. And now, my own blood was planning to toss me aside for a payday. By the way, if you like stories where the helpless old man turns out to be anything but helpless, you might want to stick around. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the kind of endings that make people wish they'd played nice in the first place. I stood there in the dim hallway, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the first surge of cold, calculated anger I'd felt in years. I didn't say a word. I just walked back to my chair, sat down, and rocked as if nothing had happened. My mind was already spinning. They thought I was an old man with no fight left. They had no idea that Mary used to say I was a mule in human form. Stubborn to the bone, impossible to push. And if they were about to try, well, I'd show them the kind of fight they'd never forget. That night, after they drove off, I went to the old gun safe in my office. Not for the shotgun. No, I was looking for a different kind of weapon, the land deeds. Thick, weather-worn envelopes with my father's handwriting still scrawled across the corners. I pulled them out and set them on the desk. Then I picked up the phone and called the one man I knew would help me without a single question, Bill Henderson. Bill's been farming the next county over for 40 years. Salt of the earth kind of guy. His dream was always to expand, but he never could get the right acreage. "Bill," I said when he picked up, "you still want that land south of the creek?" He was quiet for half a second. "John, are you serious?" "Dead serious. But I'm not selling it to you. I'm leasing it, long term. Dirt cheap. On one condition, you keep it a working farm. No developers. Ever." We agreed to meet at dawn. Out here, a handshake with the right man means more than any contract. But I plan to have both. As I hung up, I sat in the dark for a while, just listening to the ticking of the old kitchen clock. The anger had cooled into something sharper, something I could control. If Danny thought he could outmaneuver me, he was about to learn what 72 years of grit looks like when it's cornered. Because the truth is, I wasn't about to lose my home. I wasn't about to lose the only thing left of Mary, of my father, of every memory that still meant something. If my son wanted to sell my life, I was going to make damn sure he couldn't touch a single inch of it. And I knew exactly how to start. Dawn in Iowa has a sound all its own. The world doesn't wake up all at once. It stirs. The crickets fade first, then the wind picks up in the trees, then somewhere in the distance, a tractor coughs to life. That morning, though, the only thing I heard was my own heartbeat. I pulled into Bill Henderson's driveway, just as the sun was throwing its first streaks of gold across the sky. Bill was already out front, coffee in one hand, leaning against his fence. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. "Morning," I said. He gave me a slow nod. "Morning, John. You sure about this?" Never been more sure of anything. We didn't need a lot of talk. Out here, the fewer words, the bigger the meaning. We walked into his kitchen, and I laid the land deeds on the table. His wife, Marlene, poured me a cup of coffee without asking. She's the kind who knows when something serious is happening and doesn't poke at it. I told Bill exactly what I'd overheard. His face tightened. He's got 2 boys himself, and I could see in his eyes that he was imagining one of them pulling the same stunt. By the time I finished, he was shaking his head slowly. "Damn shame," he muttered. "Well, I'll keep her running, John. I swear to you. No developer will touch that ground as long as I'm breathing." We spent the next 2 hours going over the paperwork. 25 years. Rent so low it was practically a gift. But the terms were ironclad. The land had to remain a working farm. Crops in the spring, harvest in the fall, and no buildings except for barns and silos. I wanted it in writing, and Bill insisted on it too. By the time we signed, my coffee had gone cold, and the sun was high enough to light every acre in a warm, stubborn glow. We shook hands across the table, a real handshake, firm, the kind that seals something deeper than just a deal. As I drove back to the farm, a strange feeling settled over me. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was the closest I'd felt to peace in a while. Danny thought the land was a prize to be cashed in. What he didn't understand was that it was already spoken for now, locked up tighter than any vault. When I pulled into the driveway, the place looked the same as it had every morning for decades. White paint peeling off the old farmhouse, the barn door hanging a little crooked, the scent of fresh-cut alfalfa drifting in from the fields. But now I looked at it differently. I wasn't just living here anymore. I was guarding it. That night, I went through my old filing cabinet, pulling out anything Danny might use to claim authority over the place. Tax forms, old wills, insurance paperwork. I organized them into 2 stacks, what I'd keep close, and what I'd move somewhere he'd never think to look. The keep close stack went into the safe. The never find stack went into a lockbox, which I drove into town to deposit in a private bank vault. I didn't even keep the key in my apartment. I mailed it to my brother in Montana with no explanation other than, hold on to this. Don't open it unless I'm gone. By the end of the week, the chessboard was taking shape. The farm was out of Danny's reach. The paperwork was scattered in places he'd never imagined. And most importantly, nobody but Bill and my brother knew a thing. I started noticing something funny over the next few days. Whenever Danny called, his questions were getting curious. How's the place holding up? You still running the Westfield? You been thinking about downsizing? He was sniffing around, trying to gauge how close I was to letting go. Every time, I played the harmless old man. Oh, I'm just keeping busy, I'd say. Or, still plenty to do out here. I let him think I was coasting toward the inevitable. Inside, though, I was sharpening the blade. I knew the day would come when he'd make his move. And when it did, I wanted him to walk right into the wall I'd built, one brick at a time, in absolute silence. He thought he was playing a game. He didn't know the game was already over. When you've lived on a piece of land for 72 years, you know every inch of it. The good soil, the soft spots, the places that hold water after rain. But more importantly, you know exactly what's worth protecting and how to do it so no one even sees it coming. The farm was already safe in Bill's hands, but that wasn't enough. Danny didn't just want the fields, he wanted the house too. And I knew him well enough to understand that once the crops were off the table, he'd pivot to the next best thing, the farmhouse. That night, I poured myself a glass of Mary's favorite whiskey, the bottle I'd been saving since the year she passed, and sat down at the kitchen table with my phone and a notepad. The plan had to be clean. No gaps, no loose ends. First step, ownership. The land was leased, but the house itself was still mine on paper. And if it stayed that way, Danny could try every trick in the book to force a sale. I wasn't about to give him the chance. So the next morning, I called my brother, Frank, up in Montana. Frank's the kind of man who'd fight a grizzly with a stick if you told him it was threatening family. We hadn't always been close growing up. Life on a farm doesn't leave much time for brotherly bonding. But since Mary passed, he'd been one of the few people I trusted without question. Frank, I said, I need you to take ownership of the farmhouse. There was a pause. You selling? No. Gifting. You'll hold it in your name, no questions asked. I'll still live here until I decide otherwise. But this way, no one can touch it. He didn't even hesitate. Send the papers. By the end of the week, the deed was in his name. Official, legal, and completely untouchable from Danny's end. I might still be living here, but on paper, it was no longer my asset. It was a fortress. The second step was the equipment. If you think selling farm equipment is easy, you've never tried to convince a farmer to part with his tools. Every dent and grease stain has a story. But this wasn't about nostalgia. It was about removing anything of value that Danny could wave in front of a buyer. Over the course of a week, I called up old friends, neighboring farmers, even a few collectors. The tractor went first, bought by a guy 2 counties over who'd been eyeing it for years. Then the baler, the hay rake, the plow. Each sale was quiet, discreet, and in cash whenever possible. The neighbors thought maybe I was downsizing. Nobody guessed the truth. I didn't pocket the money, though. No, that would have been too easy for Danny to sniff out. Every cent went straight into a brand new bank account in Sioux City. Small credit union. No connection to my usual bank. No online access tied to my name. Just a simple passbook in a locked drawer in my apartment where it would stay. Step 3 was a little more personal. I started sorting through the inside of the house, boxing up things I wanted to keep. Family photos, Mary's quilts, my father's old war medals. These went into labeled bins and into a storage unit under my name in town. The idea was simple. If Danny ever walked into this place expecting to find leverage, all he'd find was empty furniture and memories he didn't value anyway. One evening, as I locked up the storage unit, I caught myself smiling for the first time in weeks. Piece by piece, I was dismantling every part of the farm that Danny thought he could grab. By the time I was finished, the place would look like the same old farm on the outside, but every stitch of power would be gone from his reach. I knew he wouldn't notice right away. That was the beauty of it. This kind of work is like harvesting. Takes patience. You let the seeds grow underground before anyone sees the crop. But when the time came for him to make his move, I wanted him to pull open the barn door and realize the barn was empty. To walk into the kitchen and find the deed wasn't mine. To call the bank and hear, "We have no account under that name." I didn't just want to stop him. I wanted him to feel the exact same shock I'd felt on that porch the night I overheard him. The kind of shock that hits you in the chest and leaves you standing there, wondering how you got it so wrong. And I was getting close. By the middle of May, the pieces were all where they needed to be. The farm was locked in Bill's 25-year lease. The house belonged to Frank. The equipment was sold, the money hidden away in that little Sioux City bank. From the outside, nothing had changed. To the untrained eye, the place looked the same as it had for decades. The old windmill creaking in the breeze, the barn roof patched with tin, the lilacs blooming along the fence line. But in reality, Danny's million-dollar prize had been stripped of every thread he could pull. It was time to take the last step. I needed to disappear, not forever, just far enough that he wouldn't know where I was or what I was doing. I started small. Every day, I'd pack 1 or 2 boxes, clothes, tools, books, and load them into my truck. I made trips into town under the guise of running errands. But instead of coming back with feed or hardware supplies, I came back empty-handed. What I didn't bring home went straight to my new apartment. The apartment was nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a view of a parking lot instead of rolling cornfields. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was invisible. Danny had no idea it even existed. I paid the rent in cash through a landlord who didn't ask questions. No mail forwarding, no address change. As far as the world knew, I still lived on the farm. Inside that little apartment, I set up a command center. My laptop, my phone, a few files, and a notebook where I kept track of every step I'd taken. This wasn't just about safety, it was about control. For the first time in months, I felt like I was playing offense instead of defense. Back at the farm, I installed 2 discrete security cameras. One faced the driveway, the other covered the porch. I ran the feeds to a secure app on my phone, so I could watch from anywhere. I told Bill where they were, in case he needed to check in. I knew Danny. He wouldn't just show up out of nowhere. He'd test the waters first. Maybe a casual visit to check on me. Maybe sending his wife to drop off something I didn't need. But sooner or later, he'd come in person with that realtor. And when he did, I wanted front row seats to the disaster. There was one more thing I did before I left for good. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Mary and I had eaten breakfast for 40 years, and wrote a note. Not the note he'd find later, that one I had in mind for the day of the reveal. This one was for me. I wrote down everything I'd overheard that night on the porch. Every word. I described how it felt, the pit in my stomach, the way my hands shook. And at the bottom, I wrote, "Don't forget." Not for a second. I folded it and slipped it into the drawer where Mary used to keep the good silver. A reminder to myself, this wasn't about petty revenge. It was about protecting the one thing worth more than money. The day I moved out for real, it was early, the kind of early where the sky's still pale and the dew's heavy on the grass. I stood in the yard for a while, just looking. The barn, the fields, the house. It hit me then that I might never live here again. But that was okay. Better I leave on my own terms than get shoved out by someone I raised. When I drove away, I didn't look back in the mirror. The cameras would take care of that for me. Back at the apartment, I made myself a simple dinner and sat down in front of the laptop. I opened the camera feed, just the empty driveway, the wind moving through the lilacs. Quiet. Still, it wouldn't be like that for long. By early June, the farm was running like clockwork under Bill's care. He planted soybeans in the east fields, corn in the west, and even brought in 2 new farmhands to help with repairs I hadn't gotten around to in years. From a distance, it looked like the place was thriving, which, in a way, it was. Just not for Danny. The lease paperwork was rock solid, but I wanted to make sure there was zero chance of a misunderstanding. I spent an entire afternoon at the county courthouse with Bill, filing every necessary copy of the lease into the public record. That way, if Danny ever tried to push a sale through, any decent lawyer would see within 5 minutes that the land was untouchable until 2048. While we were there, Bill suggested something that made me grin. Why not put a sign on the gate? Make it official. 2 days later, a shiny metal sign was bolted to the main entrance. Leased, and no trespassing. Access by appointment only. Underneath it, in smaller print, all inquiries, Henderson Family Farms. I could practically picture the look on Danny's face when he'd see Bill's name instead of mine. Back at the apartment, I kept refining the plan. I sent my brother Frank a full copy of the lease, along with every document showing the house was in his name. I even added a letter of authorization so he could legally deny entry to anyone, including my own son. Then I called the bank in Sioux City and confirmed the cash deposits were all secure. No way for Danny to trace them, no link to my old accounts. If he tried to go looking for assets, he'd hit a wall so fast it would make his head spin. The cameras became my new favorite hobby. Every night, I'd pull up the feed on my phone and watch the farm. Most nights, it was nothing but deer in the fields or the occasional delivery truck on the road. But a few times, I caught Danny driving by slow. Too slow. He didn't stop, didn't pull in, just looked. That told me everything I needed to know. He was sniffing around, planning. So I decided to sweeten the trap. I left just enough signs of wear on the place to make it look like I'd let things slide. A couple of weeds by the mailbox, the old rocking chair leaning a little on the porch. I wanted him thinking I was neglecting it, letting it get ready for the taking. Bill wasn't on it completely. If he calls me, "What do you want me to say?" he asked one afternoon. "Tell him you're just helping me out while I arrest. Make it sound temporary." Bill grinned. "Oh, I can sell that." By the 3rd week of June, the stage was set. The farm looked approachable, but legally locked down. Every piece of leverage Danny thought he had was already gone. And in my apartment, I had the final piece of the plan ready. The note I'd leave for him on the kitchen table. It wasn't long before the first sign came. A text from Danny. "Hey Dad, mind if we come by next Friday? Just want to check on things." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling that familiar mix of anger and grim satisfaction. Friday. Of course. That gave him a whole week to polish his pitch, get the realtor lined up, maybe even a buyer on standby. I typed back, "Sure, I'll be around." The truth was, I'd be around. Just not anywhere he could see me. I had a front row seat reserved, but it was in the corner booth of my favorite coffee shop, black coffee in hand, phone streaming the driveway feed live. I could already see it in my mind. Danny walking up to that gate, seeing the sign, realizing the land was beyond his reach. And that was just the first punch. The knockout blow was still coming. The morning they were coming, I woke up before the alarm. Not that I needed one. I'd been counting down the days like a kid waiting for Christmas, except my gift was going to be watching my son's grand plan implode. I made it a point to get to the coffee shop early. Not my usual diner, but a quiet little place downtown where the baristas didn't know me well enough to ask questions. I took a corner booth with a perfect view of the front window, ordered a black coffee, and set my phone on the table. The camera feed was already up. Driveway cam on the left, porch cam on the right. The house sat still under the early morning sun. The breeze moved through the lilacs just like it had the day I left. Peaceful, untouched. At 9:47 a.m., I saw the first sign, a white SUV easing down the road. I knew it before the camera caught the plates. Danny's. He was driving. His wife sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, lips pursed like she was already annoyed about something. In the back seat, I caught a glimpse of a third figure, probably the realtor. They didn't pull in right away. Danny slowed as they approached the gate, clearly scanning for me. That's when the sign caught his eye. I could tell because he braked hard enough to make his wife's head jerk forward. They sat there for a good 20 seconds, staring. Then the door opened, and Danny got out. I zoomed in on the feed. He walked right up to the gate, hands on his hips, reading every word on that shiny metal sign. Leased. No trespassing. Access by appointment only. And then, just below, Henderson Family Farms. I actually laughed out loud. The woman at the next table glanced over, but I didn't care. Danny called something back to his wife, but the porch cam picked it up faintly. It's leased. Henderson. What the hell is this? She got out next, striding over like she could somehow intimidate a piece of steel. Her face twisted when she saw Bill's name. She turned on Danny instantly, jabbing a finger in his chest. I couldn't hear all of it, but I caught enough. You said this was ready, and you told me he couldn't do anything. The back door of the SUV opened, and out stepped the realtor, tall, in a press suit that looked about as comfortable on a farm as a tuxedo in a pig pen. He took one look at the sign, and you could practically see the commission evaporate from his face. For a moment, I thought they might just leave. But no. Danny being Danny, he decided to try and force it. He walked around the side of the gate, looking for a way in. That's when Bill made his entrance. Right on cue, my neighbor rolled up in his tractor, the engine rumbling like an old bull clearing his throat. He parked just far enough away to make them walk to him, then climbed down with a folded copy of the lease in his hand. I couldn't hear their conversation perfectly, but the porch cam's microphone caught most of it. Bill's voice was calm, measured, like a man explaining something simple to a stubborn child. John leased me this property. 25 years. It's on file at the courthouse. You folks don't have any claim here. Danny's face turned red, that blotchy, uneven red he used to get when he was a teenager, and I told him no. He glanced back at his wife, who was glaring daggers at him, then at the realtor, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. There was some back and forth, but Bill didn't budge. He handed Danny a copy of the lease and climbed back onto his tractor like he'd just swatted a fly. A moment later, the big green machine was rolling back toward the barn, leaving them standing there in the dust. I sat in that coffee shop, sipping my drink, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. This was the moment I'd been building toward for weeks, watching them realize they'd been outplayed before they even started. And the best part? They hadn't even gotten to the kitchen table yet. After Bill left them standing in the dust, I thought maybe that would be enough to send them packing. But Danny's pride was always bigger than his sense. From the coffee shop, I watched him pull out his phone, pacing in front of the gate. A few minutes later, he unlocked the chain like he had some God-given right to do it. Technically, I guess he still had a key, but it wouldn't get him anywhere worth being. The driveway cam caught the SUV rolling up toward the house, slow and hesitant now. They parked crooked in front of the porch, like they weren't sure if they were allowed to be there. Which, they weren't. The porch cam showed them climbing the steps. Danny tried the door. It opened, of course it did. I'd left it unlocked on purpose. This was the next stage of the show. They stepped inside, and the porch mic went quiet for a moment. Then I heard his wife's voice. Where the hell is everything? I leaned closer to the screen. From the wide-angle view in the hallway, I could see it perfectly. The farmhouse looked hollow. The furniture was still there, the couch, the kitchen table, the chairs, but the life was gone. No family photos on the walls. No quilt on the back of the sofa. The shelves in the kitchen? Empty, except for a single folded note sitting in the middle of the table. Danny picked it up. I'd angled the camera just right to catch his face as he read. You decided to sell my life. So I decided to save it, without you. Dad. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted back and forth like he was looking for something else, something to prove this wasn't real. But every cabinet he opened, every drawer he yanked out told the same story. There was nothing left here for him. I'd taken it all, the valuables, the personal history, the paperwork. What was left was just wood, nails, and memories he'd never cared about. His wife crossed her arms. Told you. You always think you're smarter than everyone else. The realtor stood awkwardly by the door, probably wondering if he could get away without shaking Danny's hand on the way out. Danny slammed the note down on the table. This isn't over, he muttered, to himself more than to them. But it was over. He just didn't know how to admit it. From my seat in the coffee shop, I took a long sip of my drink and let the moment settle in. For weeks, I'd been picturing this exact scene. The look on his face when he realized there was no way forward. And here it was, playing out in real time. They stayed in the house for maybe 10 minutes. No yelling, no grand speeches. Just the slow, dawning realization that they had nothing left to bargain with. When they finally walked back to the SUV, Danny wouldn't look at the camera. His wife did, though. She stared straight at it, straight at me, in a way, and I swear she knew I was watching. Then she got in the passenger seat, slammed the door, and they drove away without another word. I watched until the SUV disappeared down the road, leaving the farm as quiet as it had been before. Bill's tractor was still moving in the far field, like nothing had happened at all. And in a way, nothing had. Not to the farm, anyway. But to Danny, this was the second punch. The one that makes you realize the fight's already been decided. And the final blow was still on its way. When they left the farm that day, I didn't smile right away. I just sat there in the coffee shop, watching the dust settle on the camera feed. Danny's SUV was gone. The driveway was empty, and the porch was still. For the first time in weeks, there was no movement on either camera, just the steady Iowa breeze moving through the lilacs. I let out a long breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. Phase 1 of my plan had worked flawlessly, but there was still one piece I wanted to put in place, something permanent. The note they'd found on the table wasn't the only one I'd written. That one was for the shock factor, for the gut punch. But I wanted something else to stay behind, in case Danny ever tried to come back. In case he ever convinced himself he could smooth talk his way into undoing all this. I drove out to the farm early the next morning. Bill was already in the field, but he spotted me and gave a little nod. I didn't stop to talk. I had work to do. Inside the farmhouse, the air smelled faintly of dust and wood polish. It felt strange being there again after watching it only through a screen for so long. The note from the day before still sat on the table where Danny had dropped it. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the top drawer of the buffet cabinet. Then I set down the second note, the one that wasn't about shock, but about truth. Danny, I built this place with my hands. Every board, every fence post, every inch of soil tilled came from sweat and work you never saw because you were too busy looking for shortcuts. I buried your grandparents here. I raised you here. I taught you everything I knew, not so you could sell it, but so you could understand what it means to keep something worth keeping. You decided that wasn't enough. You decided money was worth more than loyalty. So now, you get nothing. The farm is leased. The house belongs to your uncle. The equipment is gone. The accounts you thought you'd inherit don't exist. All that's left is the knowledge that you could have had it all, if you'd valued it at all. Dad asterisk. I placed that note right in the middle of the table, weighed down with the old ceramic salt shaker Mary had loved. Something told me Danny wouldn't throw it away. Maybe out of pride, maybe out of spite. Either way, he'd have to look at it every time he stepped into that house again, if he ever got the chance. Before I left, I did one last walk through the place. The living room looked bare without the photographs. The hallway seemed longer without the old coat rack. In the bedroom, sunlight fell in the same soft pattern across the floor it always had, and for a moment, I felt a pang. This had been home for so long, and now it was a stage I'd set for someone else's downfall. I locked the door, this time with a new key only Frank and I had, and headed back to the apartment. For the next few days, things were quiet. No calls from Danny. No surprise visits. I kept watching the cameras, though. A few times, I saw his SUV pass by, slowing just a little at the gate, but he never stopped. I figured he was stewing, plotting, trying to decide whether to confront me directly or wait me out. Either way, I was ready. On the fifth day, my phone rang. Danny. I didn't answer. He called again 2 hours later. Again, I let it go to voicemail. When he called the third time, I knew it was coming. The real confrontation. I answered. Dad, he said, and his voice was tight, controlled in that way people get when they're 1 second from boiling over. We need to talk. Face to face. I didn't hesitate. Fine. My place. Tomorrow at 10. When I hung up, I felt that old, cold steadiness settle in my chest again. Tomorrow was part 9, the last round. The day I'd look my son in the eye and make sure he understood exactly why he'd lost everything. And this time, there'd be no cameras between us. I was up before sunrise that morning. Not out of nerves. Those had burned off weeks ago, but out of habit. Years of farm life will do that to you. I brewed a pot of coffee in my little apartment and sat at the table, watching the steam curl in the morning light. I went over everything in my head one last time, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be absolutely certain there were no cracks left for Danny to pry open. At 9:55, there was a knock at the door. Not a polite tap, a hard, impatient pounding. I opened it to see Danny standing there, shoulders squared, jaw tight. He'd shaved for the occasion, like it was some kind of negotiation meeting. Behind him, his wife lingered in the hallway, arms crossed, her face set in stone. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Danny walked past me without a word, heading straight for the small table in the kitchen. He sat, leaned forward, and clasped his hands together like he was about to close a deal. His wife stayed standing, back against the wall. "Dad," he started, "I don't know what all this is about, but you've made things difficult. Unnecessarily difficult." I sat across from him, meeting his eyes. "Good." He blinked. "Good. Yeah, good. Because the way I see it, if things are easy for you, they're probably bad for me." His jaw flexed. "You've tied up the land. You've given away the house. You've sold the equipment. You've protected my life's work." I cut in. "You call it tying up. I call it making sure it's not bulldozed into a parking lot." His voice rose. "We could have done something with that money, Dad. We could have built something. You don't even need the farm anymore." I leaned forward. "You mean you could have built something? And by built, you mean bought yourself a house in Denver and started a business you've been talking about for 10 years, but never lifted a finger to start?" His wife shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. Danny's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand the opportunities we—" I slammed my hand on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. "Don't you dare tell me what I don't understand. I understand exactly what you were planning. I heard you. Every word. That night on the porch, when you thought I was sleeping. He's slipping, you said. Time to put him in assisted living." That shut him up. His eyes darted away for the first time since he'd walked in. I kept going. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to hear your own son talk about throwing you away like an old boot? To hear you scheming to sell the land your grandfather bought after he came home from the war? To sell the place where your mother and I raised you?" He swallowed hard, but didn't answer. "I've worked this land every day of my life. Your mother's buried here. My parents are buried here. And you wanted to trade it for a quick payday." Danny finally looked back at me. I didn't think you'd take it like that." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was yelling. "How else would I take it, son? You wanted to take everything I am and everything I've built and cash it in like some scratch-off ticket." Silence filled the room. His wife shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was going. "So here's how it is," I said, my voice steady now. "The farm is gone to you. The house is gone to you. The equipment is gone to you. You have nothing here anymore. That's not punishment. That's protection. Protection from you." Danny's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, he looked smaller. "You can be angry," I continued. "You can call me stubborn. You can tell yourself I've lost my mind. But you'll never be able to say I didn't see this coming. I saw it. I stopped it. And now, there's nothing left for you to take." For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then he stood, his chair scraping the floor. "This isn't over," he muttered. "It is for me," I said. He left without shaking my hand. His wife followed, but not before glancing at me with something I couldn't quite read. Maybe pity, maybe respect. When the door closed, I sat back, my coffee now cold. I felt lighter. The weight I'd been carrying since that night on the porch was gone. Danny might never forgive me, but he'd never be able to undo what I'd done. And that was enough. After they left, the apartment felt different. Not bigger, not quieter, just lighter. Like the air wasn't pressing on my chest anymore. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The farm was safe. The house was safe. My life's work was out of reach for anyone who saw it as a dollar sign instead of a legacy. Over the next few weeks, I built a new routine. I still woke up early. You can't shake decades of habit. But now instead of heading to the fields, I'd take a walk through town, grab a coffee, and chat with the folks at the community garden. I started volunteering there a few days a week, teaching kids how to plant and care for vegetables. Watching their eyes light up when they saw a sprout pushing through the dirt, it reminded me why I fell in love with farming in the first place. I visited the farm sometimes, too. Bill would wave me over from the tractor, and we'd lean on the fence, talking about the crops. He'd tell me what was growing well, what needed work, and I'd offer tips when he asked. But I never interfered. The land was his to run now, and I trusted him to do it right. Frank called one evening from Montana just to check in. "You sound happy, John," he said. And I realized I was. Not because I'd won against Danny, but because I'd taken control of my own story. I wasn't just hanging on to the past anymore. I was living in the present, and it was mine. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Danny. Wonder if he'd ever understand why I did what I did. Maybe someday he will. Or maybe he'll just tell himself the story in a way that makes him the victim. That's his choice. All I know is this. I gave him every chance to be part of this legacy. He made his choice. I made mine. And now, I can finally breathe easy knowing the farm will still be there long after I'm gone. Still green, still alive, still a farm. If you've been listening this far, you've probably already made up your mind about me. But I'll ask you anyway. Did I do the right thing? And if you were in my place, would you have done the same? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more just like it. Hit that like button and leave me a comment with your answer. I read every single one.